Good morning, welcome to Career Life Transitions. My name is Peter James and I'm with Eric Schwarz, and we are talking today about the Change Diagnostic Index. Eric Schwarz has joined us recently. Eric is a org psych out of the US. You've spent some time with the US Agriculture Department, with the Defense Department, and at George Washington University, I believe.
That's correct, yes.
So Eric is a practitioner in the Change Diagnostic Index, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we move along. But I guess at this stage, we are looking at organisations in Australia that are going through some kind of change, and whether it's driven by robotics, whether it's driven by change in the economic structure, change in exports, imports, all those kind of things. Whatever it is at the moment, we are in a state of flux. And if you are thinking that this is going to slow down at any stage, then you are sorely mistaken. In fact, I would suggest that the rate of change will be accelerating over the next period of time. And there's no doubt that this whole changing landscape and environment is a major struggle and issue for management and leadership. And guess what? We all recognise that HR then comes under the pump to try and solve and assist leadership and management of those issues. So on top of that, it's do more with less. So we're finding that not only is more required to be, focused in the change space, because that is what is required. Actually, any kind of investment is totally under scrutiny. So we understand there's not a lot of money out there to be spent on these kind of things. So what if you had a solution that was able to allowed you to measure the organisation and isolate hotspots, to target specific initiatives that have clear impacts that change the organisation and provides a clear return on investment for the organisation? Stephen Hawking says intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, and I guess if you have a look at evolution, that's what it's all about. It's that ability to change, and as we accelerate, the acceleration of changing technology is at such a great rate that an individual is not able to keep up with it. Our brains are not changing at the rate the technology is changing. So we do need to, however, train ourselves to be much more adaptable and to be ready to adapt to a changing environment. It's not up to us to keep up with technology per se, but it's certainly up to us to change our attitude towards change and say, this is the way things are always going to be moving forward, not this is a state I'm going through and thank goodness it's over. So, Eric, what's your view on it?
Well, you said a couple of great words. You mentioned technology and you mentioned attitudes. And that definitely, technology is changing, and it will keep changing and keep advancing at a faster and faster rate, hands down. We've seen that over the past couple of decades, and it's going to keep going. So spot on there. With that said, even though we all are completely aware that our organizations will continue to change, there are so many change management initiatives that fail. Over half, I think over 70% of them fail.
It's a damning statistic, isn't it?
And one thing that we're missing with that is the component of the attitude or the personal experience related to that, because at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, it is the members of the organization that make up the organization.
Yes.
So when we contextualize their experience and look at their attitudes and their ability to process change, we can then inform an organization's strategic agility. And maybe the technology is changing, but we can create a more flexible framework to receive and integrate that change without experiencing a loss of organizational effectiveness.
Yes, it's interesting. I guess there's a lot of organisations around the place that now are attempting to mechanise every component of the organisation, and I guess almost starting to try and nullify the input of people by putting robotics and technology in there. But I guess when it comes to creativity and anything like that, you must rely on people. The robotics and artificial intelligence don't have the creativity that a human has, so you're always going to have people as part of the organisation.
Yeah, and that will change. I remember a few years ago, there was some major legislation in the US around junk mail. And some members of Congress were saying that it's going to put if we ban junk mail, it's going to put people out of jobs, and old people aren't going to have letters to look forward to open.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a like an insane argument.
Yes.
But we needed less. There was less and less junk mail coming through because people consume a lot of their media and their mail online now.
Of course. Yes.
Right? So that's just a little bit of a change, but we adapted and we survived. Like you said, humans are really creative, so they're always gonna find a way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, certainly we are not seeing a change in the number of jobs that are available. We're seeing a change in the technology, and we are certainly seeing a massive change in what people are doing in organisations. But I don't think this technology is really heading towards we're all going to be able to work in 10 years' time. I think what it's more heading towards is that, well, people are going to need to adapt in organisations to that change. And there will be a brave new world for them.
Right. I mean, a few decades ago, everyone had a secretary or a personal assistant, but now if you walk into an organization, it's quite unheard of for that to be as widespread as it once was.
Absolutely.
Now that's kind of reserved more for senior roles.
Exactly. I have to do my own typing.
Yes.
So, Eric, tell us about attachment theory.
Okay. So to get to the root of change management, we first have to understand attachment theory, which is one of the most fundamental human experiences there is. And it begins at a really, really young age, maybe even prenatal. The best, kind of most popular example is Linus from the Peanuts cartoon, Charlie Brown. He had his blanket. It was his security item. So like for me, mine was a dirty little pillow that I had when I was a kid that I carried with me everywhere. Other kids have stuffed animals or toys or this and that. While the attachment item changes, the idea of attachment does not. So it just gets swapped out later as you move on through life. And in the workplace, which is kind of what we're looking at today, people will have all sorts of attachment items. So they could have a specific break room be their attachment item. They could have a commute, an easy commute, a work schedule, an infrastructure with colleagues, a boss, a work processes, a piece of technology they have that, whether they know it or not, provides some sense of comfort. So when change happens, without question, attachment items are disrupted. So in the same way that, when we lose our blanket or a stuffed animal and there's a little bit of chaos there, adults experience chaos when their attachment items are disrupted.
And yet you can see, if you're not taking that into account, how disruptive that could be in the workplace. I mean, it does come down to individuals and individuals' choices to adapt to change, as opposed to the drivers of the organisation. I mean, that's a bigger agenda, I guess, but for making that effective, having a whole group of employees who are not happy in the new changed role is really going to damage your productivity.
Absolutely, and it might not present as something as obvious as being unhappy. Humans are complex, social creatures, and when attachment is disrupted, it might present as being unhappy, but it might also present as unhappy being like melancholy. It might also present as anxious or a loss in productivity, loss in creativity, absenteeism, you name it. It can show up all sorts of ways.
Okay, and when you're talking about that, the symptoms being presented in different ways, I guess now we're starting to talk about what the Change Diagnostic Index measures.
Right, exactly. The Change Diagnostic Index is a really, really brief tool that has been validated and normed, which means it can be repeated over and over again, and it has statistical consistency every time that it's applied across any organization. It measures the individuals, so it'd be you or me, we would take this, and our symptoms when we lose our attachment items. So it doesn't necessarily straight up ask what is the attachment item that's lost, which can be investigated. It asks how would Peter respond if his attachment item is gone? Would he respond with anxiety, with frustration, with withdrawal, refusal to participate? So there are 6 different individual symptoms that we look at, and then we aggregate those. And based on that aggregation of individual symptoms, we can then understand how that manifests within the organization.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that when we then know how the organization is presenting, it could be widespread reduction in morale, it could be kind of a sense of increased conflict in the organization, kind of tension rising, turnover, absenteeism, a lot of familiar symptoms we know about, but we don't always necessarily know about the root cause.
Yeah.
So we know, oh, there was a change, and oh, the organization is presenting these symptoms, but there's that space in between, the space where the individual experiences, and that's what the CDI looks at.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if it's machinery, then machinery, I just reprogram it, but humans are not the same as that.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I guess there are a lot of process-based change models around the place we've seen out there that I guess really try and present humans as if they're going through a track. Certainly having worked in change management and organisations part of projects for many, many years, I guess the organisation wanted some kind of security to know if we did this and then we moved to the next stage, and the next stage is if human behaviour, human interaction was not only grouped but also sheep-like and could be measured by step. I guess when we're now talking about the CDI, it is looking at it from a different point of view. Just explain that to us a little bit.
Sure. Well, as you said, we're not sheep, and human behavior and human processing is not a linear path.
Yep.
So we use all the human data that we gather to create or substitute whatever attachment item is missing for the employees, and let that inform the change management strategy that's happening in the organization. So rather than kind of going in and creating a sense of urgency or whatever your path would be, you have this information as a tool.
Yep.
And the brilliant thing about it, one of the brilliant things about it, is that it increases strategic agility so that the organization itself has a healthier framework, not just to manage change in this circumstance, but moving forward. There's a whole different attitude about change.
Yes. Yeah, it's always interesting. I guess Cotter and the 8 steps and all that type of, I guess, change theory. I mean, I think after leadership, change theory in terms of management books is the second largest subject. So you'd have to ask yourself, well, if all these models are being generated over so many years, that we still have a failure rate of something around 70-80% in terms of change. So I guess something needs to change in the way that we approach change.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I maintain contextualizing the individual experience. I mean, you can have technology and you can have robots, and we're going to have more and more of that, as we said, but at the heart of every organization will be humans.
Yes.
The human experience.
Yes. Yeah. So the Change Diagnostic Index, I guess in terms of a timetable, is really, we recommend it roll out 3 times. It's a reasonably inexpensive tool that surveys each individual. It comes in, I guess, 3 phases if you're looking at a change process, if you like. So you're really baselining it through phase 1. That has a purpose, which is assessing the concerns and themes and the possible areas of resistance. We look at the inputs, the actions, and the outcomes of interventions around that. Through your mid-change process or at a later stage in the organisation, phase 2 is then looking at that and assessing what that initial interaction looked like, and then making adjustments to make sure that there's some things you were doing initially that are probably being accepted now and don't need as much focus as other things that are starting to pop up. And then as we move through to phase 3, it's doing that assessment again and really seeing where you're at. And if it's at the end of the change, it's how you're embedding that change so you have a sustainable movement forward, as opposed to the organisation slipping back to the way it was. How does the timeline work for you, Eric?
That is something that's agreed upon between the consultant and the organization before all of this starts. So just every organization is going to have a different timeline for what change they're implementing. It could be something relatively quick, maybe 3 months for the whole change initiative to roll out. Some organizations will take 1 year to 2 years, even longer, to completely roll out whatever change initiatives are happening.
And sometimes they're just continually changing, I guess. You're in some industries, your change is never ending.
Absolutely. And on that note, some organizations choose to administer the CDI annually just to kind of get a pulse of human data within the organization.
CDI lead interventions.
Yes. So when we get this data, what we do as consultants is we co-design the interventions with the organization, with the HR professionals or the change management, whoever kind of is our point of contact in the other organization.
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily here to tell you what to do. We are here to show you more about your organization, to let you know what's going on just beneath the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the cost benefit of the Change Diagnostic Index, I mean, it is not difficult to fill out. I think you were saying it takes about 7 minutes to fill out the questionnaire. So it has a low impact, low monetary investment, but I guess for stakeholders, it can either reinforce the existing change management strategies. So if you have a change management in place, is it supporting that? Are you doing the right things? Provides additional ideas as to change management. It allows you to adjust it, target it, and it is all about, I guess, engagement with people, and in management it's about we are listening to you. We are asking you what you're looking for, asking you what you need to smooth the change process, and supporting that in some ways. For top management, it allows confidence that key stakeholders are effectively managing the change. That I guess one of the nice things that really drew me to the CDI early was that you're actually slicing and dicing demographics through the organization. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that is a great point. So in part of the co-design process, one thing that we look at is the demographic factors tool within the organization. So you might choose to look at 5 different demographic features in the survey. You could say male versus female, tenure in the organization, where you are at a different division or different branch, or whether you work frontline with customers or whether you don't. That's all part of the co-design. So at the end, we can tease the data out and you can see which populations within your organization are the most vulnerable and which ones don't need as much attention for the change management initiative, which ultimately can save your organization a lot of resources, because you then know how to apply the interventions and to whom you should apply them.
I think that's absolutely key to senior management. I mean, I see organisations roll out a leadership program right across the board, but not everyone needs a leadership program. That may not be the intervention that fits that area, or they roll out some kind of training intervention or coaching intervention under the, I guess, misbelief that that is what the organisation requires, and they may be partially right. There are sections in the organisation that do require that, but another section may require other initiatives and other change support.
Exactly.
So benefits to the organisation are also about working past an old culture of resistance. I guess what organisations should really be looking at moving forward is a culture and values that support change, that we are accepting that change is a continuous factor, and rather than in a resistance mode to it, we're excited and looking forward to the next stages in the organisation's life cycle, if you like.
I'll add one thing to that if I can.
Please, yes.
Yeah, I think with older organizations that will be a more common occurrence, that resistance to change, because for a lot of these organizations, what worked for a long time did really well.
Yes.
And then kind of all of a sudden it doesn't work.
Yes.
But there are younger organizations who might have a really open attitude towards change, that could still benefit from this, because even when you have a willingness and an openness to change, and it could be part of your culture, you're still going to have blind spots.
Yes, of course.
Within your organization, and just completely miss out on a lot of details, again, that are just beneath the surface. So whether the organization is big or small, or new or old, or proactive with change, or has a culture of change resistance, there's always some insight that can be gleaned or made available through the CDI.
Yes. I guess ultimately the benefits of the organisation is to increase employee morale, increase productivity, reduce turnover, and get on with the business of being the business.
Yeah, and there's so much data and research out there on the economic cost of turnover.
Yes.
Paying other employees overtime, recruitment costs, training costs, you pay out, like you name it.
Yes.
It's really expensive to have to lose and replace employees, especially good ones.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, good employees, with the event of things like Glassdoor and what have you, if you want to attract really good employees, you've got to be a good employer. And that is about the full life cycle of someone joining your organisation, from the day they walk in the door to at some stage in the future if they walk out the door and everything in between, because good people want to work for good companies.
Right, right. Things have, the model has really changed. I think kind of the classical model was that the employee had to constantly prove his or her worth to the organization, and now sometimes it's getting to be a bit more equitable in that the employee is not only proving his or her value to the organization, but the organization is constantly needing to court the employee as well and make sure that there's a satisfaction on both sides.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess one of the major technological changes that we've seen over the last couple of years is that I can find out how something is performing with a click of a button on my phone now. So if I want to check out a local coffee shop or I want to get a recipe off, I just click on there and I automatically find out what gets the highest rating, what people are looking at, what they're involved in. So there's getting to that point now where there's nowhere really to hide. If you're not performing well, someone's going to find out about it, and that certainly is driving a lot of need for innovation in organisations, and that is not only their customer base now; it is also moving into their employee base.
Absolutely.
So, what are our key takeaways, Eric?
The first one is that attachment behavior has always existed and will always exist. And when we start to remember that, it is a game changer in change management.
Yes. Yeah.
And the second one is just to be aware of what the attachments are in this context. And how any change initiatives can either remove or add or disrupt, I'll say disrupt, those attachment items. And another one is about the CDI that we haven't mentioned yet, is that it uses a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. So not only are we kind of getting the charts and graphs from it all, but there's a richness that we get through conversations or through qualitative questions that helps us to triangulate what it is that we're looking at. And by that I mean we can have quantitative data show us one thing and qualitative data show us the same thing but from a different perspective. So I'd say over 90, maybe even 95% of the time they line up. And if they don't, that is a call for investigation to go in and look just a little bit more closely. But it's with that triangulated data that you can then make these customized solutions and these targeted interventions, and that's when you have the capacity to tangibly support the organization in its change endeavor. So first and foremost, it's really all about the human experience and human data. Now,
we are very excited about the Change Diagnostic Index. I guess for the first time, rather than just lumping change together across the entire organisation, we have the opportunity to actually slice and dice that organisation and really focus our change initiatives and change activities specific to the area of what's required, rather than trying to take a blanket approach to everything else. And because it's measurable, because it's targeted, it provides an excellent return on investment. So the Change Diagnostic Index is exclusively available at Career Life Transitions. Please give us a call. We're more than happy to come out and have a chat to you about that. We certainly have a lot of material we can send through to you, and Eric and I would love to have a chat. And we'll buy the coffee. Thanks very much, Peter, James and Eric from Career Life Transitions.
Thank you.